The year was 1991. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The Soviet Union was crumbling. The world was watching as one of history's greatest empires collapsed in slow motion. In the heart of this dying superpower, a nation of 52 million people was about to make a decision that would change everything. Ukraine was preparing to step out of Moscow's shadow and into the unknown. December 1st, 1991. A referendum. 90% of Ukrainians voted for independence. From Lviv to Luhansk, from Kyiv to Crimea, the message was clear. Ukraine wanted freedom. On December 25, 1991, the Soviet flag came down from the Kremlin for the last time. Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. The USSR was officially dead. Within hours, President George H.W. Bush made a phone call to Kyiv. The United States of America formally recognized Ukraine as an independent nation. Not in weeks, not in days, within hours. This wasn't just diplomatic courtesy. This was a statement. At the White House, advisors debated some worried about angering Russia. Others questioned whether Ukraine could survive on its own. The Soviet nuclear arsenal was scattered across multiple republics, including Ukraine. But Bush saw something different. He saw an opportunity to reshape the post-Cold War world. He saw a chance to bring a crucial European nation into the democratic fold. The partnership between Washington and Kyiv was born not out of convenience, but out of conviction. By 1992, reality set in. Ukraine had inherited 1,900 strategic nuclear warheads from the Soviet Union. Overnight, it had become the third largest nuclear power in the world, behind only the USA and Russia. The world was terrified. In the White House Situation Room, President Bill Clinton faced a dilemma. Ukraine was unstable economically. Its military was in disarray. The thought of thousands of nuclear weapons in such uncertainty kept world leaders awake at night. But Ukraine had its own fears. Russia had never truly accepted Ukrainian independence. Moscow politicians openly questioned Ukraine's right to exist as a separate nation. Without nuclear weapons, what would stop a Russian invasion? Negotiations began. Tense, difficult, heist. The USA made a proposal. Give up the nukes, and we'll guarantee your security. Ukrainian President Leonid Kravchuk was skeptical. Words on paper, he said to his advisors. What are American guarantees worth? But the pressure was immense. Economic incentives poured in. Security assurances were drafted. The international community united in demanding Ukrainian On December 5, 1994, in Budapest, Ukraine signed the agreement. In exchange for giving up its entire nuclear arsenal, Ukraine received security assurances from the USA, UK, and Russia. The Budapest Memorandum promised to respect Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Ukraine dismantled 1,900 nuclear warheads. It destroyed its strategic bombers. It became a non-nuclear state. It was arguably the greatest act of nuclear disarmament in history, and it was built on trust. Trust in America's word. The years that followed were quiet but crucial. American aid flowed into Ukraine. Not just money, but expertise. Democrats taught Ukrainians about free elections. Economists helped privatize state industries. Military advisors began modest cooperation programs. Ukraine joined NATO's Partnership for Peace program in 1994. Ukrainian soldiers trained alongside American troops in joint exercises. Cultural exchanges brought Ukrainian students to American universities. It wasn't always smooth. Corruption plagued Ukraine's government. Oligarchs seized state assets. Elections were marred by fraud and violence. The 2004 Orange Revolution showed Ukraine's democratic aspirations. When President Leonid Kuchma tried to rig elections in favor of his chosen successor, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians filled Kyiv's Maidan Square in protest. The USA supported the protesters, not with weapons or soldiers, but with diplomatic pressure and moral support. Secretary of State Colin Powell warned against election fraud. Senator John McCain visited the protests. Eventually, the fraudulent election was overturned. Viktor Yushchenko, the pro-Western candidate, became president. Democratized had won, and the USA-Ukraine partnership had deepened. But in Moscow, Vladimir Putin was watching, and he wasn't happy. February 2014, Kyiv's Maidan Square again filled with protesters. President Viktor Yanukovych, who had defeated Yushchenko in 2010, had just rejected an association agreement with the European Union. Instead, he accepted a Russian bailout package. Ukrainians were furious. For months, they had dreamed of European integration, of visa-free travel, of Western prosperity. Yanukovych's decision felt like a betrayal. The protests grew. Yanukovych's riot police cracked down. On February 20th, snipers fired into the crowd. Over 100 protesters died. Within days, Yanukovych fled to Russia, and then Putin struck. On February 27th, unmarked soldiers in green uniforms appeared in Crimea. They had no insignia, no flags. Russia denied they were Russian soldiers, calling them local self-defense forces. The world knew better. By March 16th, Russia had staged a referendum in Crimea. Under armed occupation, with international observers blocked, Crimeans supposedly voted to join Russia. On March 18, 2014, Vladimir Putin stood in the Kremlin and announced Crimea was now part of Russia. In Washington, the Obama administration faced its first major test of the Budapest Memorandum. Ukraine had given up nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. Now Russia had violated those guarantees. What would America do? The response was swift but limited. Economic sanctions hit Russian officials. Diplomatic isolation began. The G8 became the G7, kicking Russia out. But there were no American troops, no military intervention, just aid packages and training programs. For many Ukrainians, it felt like abandonment. The Budapest Memorandum, they said bitterly, wasn't worth the paper it was written on. But something else was happening quietly. American military advisors arrived in Ukraine. Not combat troops, but trainers. They brought modern tactics, communications equipment, and anti-tank weapons. The CIA began sharing intelligence, satellite imagery, communications intercepts, information on Russian troop movements. The Trump administration brought uncertainty. President Trump's relationship with Ukraine was complicated. He provided Javelin anti-tank missiles, a significant upgrade in lethal aid. But his 2019 phone call asking Ukraine's president to investigate Joe Biden led to Trump's first impeachment. Ukraine found itself at the center of American domestic politics, but the military partnership continued. Joint exercises expanded. American special forces trained Ukrainian units. The Pentagon studied Russian tactics in Donbass, learning lessons that would reshape American military doctrine. Ukraine's military transformed Gongwar, the Soviet-era conscripts with rusted equipment, in their place, a modern professional force trained in NATO tactics. By 2021, when Joe Biden became president, the USA-Ukraine relationship had evolved into something unprecedented, a deep security partnership between a superpower and a non-NATO ally facing Russian aggression. Biden knew Ukraine well. As vice president, he had been Obama's point person on Ukraine policy. He had visited Kyiv multiple times. He understood the stakes. Throughout 2021, American intelligence agencies noticed something alarming. Russia was building up forces on Ukraine's border. Tens of thousands of troops, tanks, artillery, field hospitals. This wasn't a drill. This was preparation for war. November 2021, Biden's national security advisor Jake Sullivan received the intelligence briefing. Russia was planning a full-scale invasion of Ukraine, not just Donbass, the entire country. The plan was breathtaking in its scope: multiple axes of attack, airborne assaults to seize Kyiv, amphibious landings in the south, a quick decapitation strike to overthrow the Ukrainian government within 72 hours. The Biden administration faced a choice: stay quiet or go public. They chose to go public. In an unprecedented intelligence disclosure campaign, the USA began revealing Russia's plans, troop buildups, attack routes, timeline predictions, false flag operation plans. The goal was to strip away Russia's element of surprise and rally international support for Ukraine. Russia called it propaganda. European allies were skeptical. Even Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged calm, worried about panic. But American intelligence kept coming. More details, more warnings. In February 2022, CIA Director William Burns personally flew to Kyiv with a message: the invasion is coming. Days, not weeks. The USA offered to evacuate Zelensky to set up a government in exile to prepare for resistance. Zelensky refused to leave but accepted military aid. Shipments began arriving: anti-tank missiles, ammunition, communications equipment. Not enough to stop Russia, but enough to make them bleed. On February 23, 2022, Biden addressed the nation: Russia has chosen a premeditated war that will bring catastrophic loss of life and human suffering. Hours later, the missiles began to fly. 3:40 a.m. Kyiv time. Cruise missiles struck Ukrainian military installations across the country. Russian troops poured across the border from Belarus, Russia, and Crimea. Thousands of paratroopers attempted to seize Hatamal Airport outside Kyiv, the largest land war in Europe since World War II had begun. Western intelligence predicted Kyiv would fall in 72 hours. Some gave Ukraine a week, maybe two. The Russian plan relied on speed and shock. Overwhelm the defenses, seize the capital, install a puppet government, present the world with a fait accompli. But something went wrong. Ukrainian resistance was fierce. Hostomel Airport became a bloodbath as Ukrainian forces counterattacked. The Russian advance on Kyiv stalled in the suburbs. And in Kyiv, President Zelensky made a choice that changed everything. The USA had offered to evacuate him. A plane was waiting. He could establish a government in exile and continue the fight from safety. Zelensky's response, captured on his phone: "I need ammunition, not a ride." That video went viral. A comedian turned president in military fatigues, standing in Kyiv's government quarter, refusing to flee. It electrified the world. In Washington, the Biden administration launched the largest military aid operation since World War II. The initial package, $350 million, then $800 million, then $1 billion. The numbers kept climbing. Javelins and Stingers poured into Ukraine by the thousands. Russian tanks burned. Russian helicopters fell from the sky. The logistics were a nightmare. Poland became the hub. American cargo planes landed every few hours at Polish airbases. Trucks carried weapons to the Ukrainian border. Ukrainian drivers took them the rest of the way, running Russian airstrikes and artillery fire. The CIA set up a massive operation to coordinate. Intelligence sharing reached unprecedented levels. American satellites tracked every Russian unit. AWACS planes orbiting over Poland fed real-time data to Ukrainian forces. By April, Russia's assault on Kyiv had failed. Russian forces withdrew, leaving behind mass graves and devastation. The war entered a new phase, a grinding attritional struggle in eastern and southern Ukraine, and the American aid packages kept evolving. HIMARS rocket systems arrived in June 2022, dramatically extending Ukraine's strike range. Ukrainian forces began hitting Russian ammunition depots, command posts, and logistics hubs deep behind the lines. In September, Ukraine launched a stunning counteroffensive, retaking thousands of square kilometers in Kharkiv region. Patriot air defense systems arrived in late 2022, Bradley fighting vehicles in early 2023, Abrams tanks followed. By late 2024, the USA had committed over $100 billion in aid to Ukraine. Military equipment, economic support, humanitarian assistance. It wasn't just money, it was a commitment. This wasn't charity, this was strategy. For $100 billion, the USA had severely degraded the Russian military without losing a single American soldier, strengthened NATO. Unity to levels not seen since the Cold War demonstrated American commitment to its partners. Gathered invaluable intelligence on Russian capabilities, field-tested American weapon systems against a near-peer adversary, but more than that, it was about principle. In 1994, Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons based on American security assurances. If the USA abandoned Ukraine now, what message would that send? To Taiwan, facing Chinese pressure, to South Korea, to every ally counting on American support. The credibility of American guarantees was on the line. From that first phone call in December 1991 to the battlefields of 2024, the USA-Ukraine relationship has traveled an extraordinary arc. It began with hope, a newly free nation and a superpower committed to supporting democracy. It was tested in Budapest. Ukraine's act of trust, giving up nuclear weapons for paper promises. It was strained in 2014 when those promises seemed hollow in the face of Russian aggression. And it was forged in fire in 2022, when Ukraine fought and America supported in a partnership neither side fully anticipated. The story isn't over. The war continues. The outcome remains uncertain, but one thing is clear. The USA-Ukraine relationship has become one of the defining partnerships of the 21st century.